Hello, I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching another episode of Explained with me. Today we uncover one of Latin America's most complex political stories. Who is Maria Corina Machado, the Venezuelan opposition leader recently awarded the Nobel Peace Prize? Why has she been forced into hiding? And what drives her relentless challenge to Nicolas Maduro? Over the next few minutes, we'll trace her journey, her struggles, and the high-stakes political chess between Venezuela and the world. From founding electoral watchdog groups to surviving arrest threats, her story reveals the risks and dynamics of opposition in a crisis-ridden nation. Let's start with the woman at the center of it all. Now, Maria Corina Machado Peresca was born in 1967 on the 7th of October in Venezuela. She is a politician, activist, and prominent opposition figure to both Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. She served as a member of the National Assembly from 2011 to 2014, and today she is the national coordinator of Vente Venezuela, which is a political party known for promoting democratic principles. Now, Time magazine has also recognized her as one of the world's 100 most influential people this year. These honors come despite a ban from leaving Venezuela, highlighting both her impact and the risks she faces daily. Machado's political journey began in 2002 when she co-founded Sumate, an electoral watchdog group dedicated to ensuring transparent voting. She ran in the 2012 opposition primary for the presidency, and her influence grew during the 2014 protests against Maduro's policies, where she emerged as a central organizer. In recent years, her political path faced significant obstacles. In January last year, the Supreme Court confirmed her qualification from holding public office for 15 years. Despite winning the opposition primary for the 2024 presidential election, she was replaced, and her temporary successor, Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia, relied heavily on her support. Now, since the 2024 election, Maria Corina Machado has remained in hiding, following repeated threats from Maduro's government. For over 15 months, her location has been unknown as she takes extreme precautions to protect herself. She is repeatedly warned that capture by authorities could put her life in grave risk. Now, her last public appearance was on January 9 earlier this year when she was briefly detained at a protest in Caracas. Moreover, in August of last year, she published a letter in the Wall Street Journal explaining her decision to go into hiding and also citing fears for her life, personal freedom, and the safety of fellow Venezuelans under Maduro's authoritarian rule. In the latest streak of impact, these security threats and travel restrictions have prevented her from attending the Nobel ceremony in Oslo. With her safety compromised, the question remains, what exactly drives her relentless opposition to Nicolas Maduro? Now, Maria Corina Machado's opposition to Nicolas Maduro stems from her belief that Venezuela is no longer a democracy but a criminalized authoritarian state. She argues that Maduro's government has dismantled institutions, manipulated elections, and ruled only through instilling fear. She claims elections have been controlled long before a single vote is cast, pointing to the 2024 presidential election as a turning point where the opposition's victory was ignored. She also noted that the 2024 elections were then followed by arrests, repression, and disqualifications. Additionally, she has also highlighted the collapse of the rule of law, claiming institutions serve those in power rather than the public. Economically, Machado blames decades of socialist policies for destroying productivity, wiping out savings, and pushing millions into poverty. Moreover, she has also advocated for liberal economic reforms, including privatization and rebuilding state industries. Her criticism extends to Maduro's alliances with countries like Iran, Russia, Cuba, which she argues isolate Venezuela and connect the regime to criminal networks. Machado has also exposed human rights violations, including torture, enforced disappearances, and detention of political opponents. Now, as per reports, Maria Corina Machado will not personally receive the Nobel Peace Prize in Oslo. Her daughter and Corina Sosa Machado will accept the Nobel Peace Prize on her behalf and deliver the official speech. Even in her absence, the ceremony has become a political signal. Latin American leaders from Argentina, Ecuador, Panama and Paraguay are attending, highlighting her regional significance. What was meant to be a celebration of peace also openly highlights the risks faced by opposition figures in Venezuela. Now, Machado's global recognition leads to the question, why did the Nobel Committee choose her and what controversy has her award generated? Let's break down that for you. The Nobel Committee awarded Machado the 2024 Peace Prize for her campaign to defend democratic rights and dedicatedly pushing for peaceful political transition after years of authoritarian rule. Her combination of civic courage, persistence and leadership stood out in a region where political space is shrinking. Machado dedicated the prize to the Venezuelan people, framing it as a recognition of their resistance and suffering. She publicly aligned the award with international pressure against Maduro, including credit to US President Donald Trump's hardline stance. Now, this connection has sparked widespread debate. Critics claim her support for sanctions and pressure contradicts traditional nonviolence, while supporters argue that such pressure is essential against a criminalized state. Now, the international dimension of Machado's struggle cannot be ignored. Her alliances and recognition are inextricably linked to the tense relationship between Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro and Donald Trump. This relationship has been defined by confrontation, sanctions, and competing narratives of sovereignty and intervention. Now, between 2017 and 21, the United States imposed sweeping sanctions on Venezuela's oil industry, froze assets connected to Maduro's inner circle, and backed efforts to isolate Caracas diplomatically. US President Donald Trump also questioned Maduro's legitimacy, presenting his government as authoritarian and corrupt. After the 2024 US election, Maduro publicly congratulated Trump and proposed dialogue. This overture, however, did not lead to relief, and on November 21 this year, the two held a phone call. Reports suggest Trump rejected Maduro's requests for sanctions relief, urging him to step aside under limited safe passage terms. Days later, Trump announced that airspace around Venezuela should be considered closed, sparking condemnation from Caracas. Maduro responded with defiance, appealing to OPEC and framing the move as an attempt to seize Venezuela's oil. The fight between Washington and Caracas isn't just political. At its core, experts say it involves control over Venezuela's strategic resources, particularly oil. Venezuela proposes and possesses the world's largest proven oil reserves, over 300 billion barrels, making it crucial in global energy politics. Maduro argues that US pressure, including sanctions and diplomatic isolation, is aimed at weakening his government and gaining access to these resources. This narrative helps Maduro justify internal control and rally support, presenting himself as a defender of national sovereignty. The US, however, insists its focus is democracy, human rights, and countering criminal networks. As airspace and sanctions become sources of tension, a military dimension emerges. Since September 2025, US strikes have targeted vessels allegedly linked to drug trafficking and organized crime. Officials say these vessels were connected to groups classified as foreign terrorist organizations. The operations have resulted in more than 80 deaths over a few months. The first strike occurred on the 2nd of September, killing 11 individuals near Sucre State. Strikes expanded through the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific, targeting small boats and semi-submersibles. Now, the US argues these sanctions disrupted drug flows and saved thousands of lives. But human rights groups and Latin American governments have condemned the strikes, calling them extrajudicial killings and violations of international law. For Maduro, these strikes support his claim of internal and external attacks. For Machado, they align with her argument that sustained pressure is needed against a criminalized state. The impact of these actions reaches far beyond Venezuela's borders. Just last month, on the 29th of November, US President Trump announced that US airspace above and around Venezuela should be considered closed. Now, under international law, no country can unilaterally impose a no-fly zone without UN authorization or war. Now, the announcement prompted international carriers to suspend flights to Caracas, citing safety and insurance risks. Venezuela responded by revoking operating permits, accusing airlines of participating in economic pressure. Domestic flights continue, but international connectivity is sharply reduced, affecting trade, migration, and business. United Nations experts have warned that these measures strain international law and Venezuela's sovereignty. What began as security advisories now become a new front in a growing geopolitical crisis, with consequences spilling across the nation and region. Venezuela's political collapse and mass migration have shaped politics in Chile, where immigration, security, and crime dominate the presidential runoff. Chile's foreign-born population has doubled in 7 years, with Venezuelans making up over 40% of immigrants. This surge fuels public anxiety and influences political debates on law and order. Right-wing candidate Jose Antonio cast promises to deport undocumented migrants and tighten borders. Left-wing Janet Jara advocates legal registration and deportation for criminals, stressing institutional strength. The debate reflects how Venezuela's crisis is a reference point across Latin America, influencing elections, voter fears, and policy discussions far from Caracas. And that brings us back to Maria Corina Machado, whose influence now stretches beyond Venezuela's borders, making her a central figure in both regional and global politics. Ahead of the Nobel ceremony in Norway's Oslo, controversy has intensified. Events were cancelled, protests erupted, and activist groups questioned whether the prize legitimized military pressure. In Caracas, the Maduro government rejected the decision, warned she would be labeled a fugitive, and accused her of alignment with foreign interests. Diplomatic ties with Norway were threatened, framing the award as part of a broader strategy to elevate the opposition. Now, Maria Corina Machado is no longer just an opposition leader in hiding. She is a symbol of Venezuela's struggle between freedom and authoritarian control. For supporters, she represents courage, resistance, and the hope for a democratic future. For critics, her strategy risks escalation and regional tension. Her influence now extends beyond Venezuela's border, shaping politics, migration debates, and international relations across Latin America. As Venezuela faces a crossroads, one question still looms: will Machado's vision lead to freedom, or will the conflict deepen?